Welcome, everybody. This is Rabbi Drew Kaplan, and welcome to our weekly Village Torah discussion on the Torah portion. This week's Torah portion is Vayera, and Vayera is a really interesting. There's really a lot to discuss in the Parashat Vayera and the portion of Vayera. So much. There is one thing we will talk about today is hospitality, with Abraham receiving these three. The text calls them men, but they're kind of also angels. There's some interesting ambiguity going on there. They visit Lot and warn him to get out, and ultimately various towns are destroyed. Lot seeks shelter, and ultimately his daughters think that they are the last remnants of humanity in the world. They get their father drunk on 2 consecutive nights and then have progeny from their father through the means of wine. And then there's still a lot more in the Torah portion involving Abraham and various creating a covenant with stuff. I mean, there's still so much more. There's a lot going on. And really, we could do this again next year, talking about Parashat Vayera, and still have something totally different to discuss. So we have, I wanted to start out because this is really a big piece of the Torah portion, is Abraham's hospitality to these 3 visitors. I'm going to use visitors because the text calls them men, but ultimately they are almost more like angels. And I'm going to bring up what we have here in chapter 18, where we really get things going with the Torah portion. And I'm going to read out. So God appeared to Abraham by the terebinths of Mamre. Abraham was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. Now, for a little bit of context, Abraham has done Brit Milah. He has done circumcision. So he is recovering from this circumcision. He is sitting at the entrance of the tent as the heat of the day. The English says as the day grew hot, but kichom hayom. It was like the heat. It was the hot of the day. It was the high point of the heat of the day. So he was probably pretty weary, not only from the heat, but also from having gone through the circumcision. Looking up, Abraham saw 3 men standing near him. As soon as he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to go greet them, and bowing to the ground, he said, "My lords, if it please you, do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be brought. Bathe your feet. Recline under the tree, and let me fetch a morsel of bread that you may refresh yourselves. Then go on, seeing that you have come your servant's way." They replied, "Do as you have said." So Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, "Quick, 3 seahs of choice flour, knead, and make cakes." Then Abraham ran to the herd, took a calf, tender and choice, and gave it to a servant boy who hastened to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them. And he waited on them underneath the tree as they ate. So this is this episode where it's funny because what was going on before. So just, you know what, let's go back. I want to provide a little bit of context. Can you see the you know what, I'm going to stop share for a moment and then share again. Okay, so what we have here before 18 is this at the very end of chapter 17 of Genesis. So Abraham and his son Ishmael were circumcised on that very day, and all of his household, his homeborn slaves, and those that had been brought from outsiders were circumcised with him. So just as a little bit of context, he was recovering. And so it's no easy feat to be so hospitable when recovering, probably not doing so well himself, and yet despite his infirmity, his recovering, and the heat, nevertheless, he hastens, he quickly goes. And these aren't people he sees all the time. They aren't friends. They aren't neighbors. These are total strangers to Abraham, absolute strangers to Abraham. And nevertheless, he's quick to, first of all, get them into the tent where they can escape from the sun, right? It mentioned it was kichom hayom. It was at the heat of the day. And anybody in the desert wants to get out of the heat of the day. So he gives them shelter. He says, what about a little water, and water is key. It's so necessary in the desert. And also he says, let me fetch a morsel of bread. And nevertheless, so in addition to asking Sarah to make these breads, he also then himself, he didn't even ask them if they wanted a calf. He then prepared it himself. So he goes above and beyond what he said, hey, do you want some bread and water? And then he goes above and beyond and prepares, he takes one of his animals. And that's also, again, that's a serious contribution. That's not to be taken lightly. This is some serious hospitality that Abraham is exercising here in these three total strangers. Deb, do you have any questions so far?
Well, they're complete strangers.
Complete strangers.
So,
he doesn't recognize them.
But his hospitality, considering his physical situation at this time, is extremely kind. It's going way beyond what you would have expected. So I would think it would be considered very kind and very more than proper.
Yeah, I think anybody reading this would see that Abraham here is going above and beyond than what would normally be considered to be hospitable.
Right.
I'm going to compare this with something else we see in this week's Torah portion, which is how Lot handles these exact same visitors. So, can you see can you see the beginning of chapter 19 on my screen, or is that not there?
I certainly can, yes.
Oh, chapter 19 is on the screen? Okay, great.
It sure is.
All right, so it's interesting because we have these three angels that had visited Abraham, and now we have two who now visit Lot, which is a separate issue of there were three, now there are two. What happened to that third? I'm not going to go into that now, but we have these angels arriving in Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. So this is already cooler weather. Thinking about when they visited Abraham, it was in the heat of the day, so midday, sun's beating down. Now they're coming, visiting Sodom in the evening while Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to greet them, and bowing low with his face to the ground, he said, please, my lords, turn aside to your servant's house to spend the night and bathe your feet, then you may be on your way early. So he is exercising, he's reaching out to them. They're not coming in bedraggled, oh, we need food and water. Both in Abraham, both with Lot, they go out of their way to invite them in and to provide hospitality and to give them water. Now here they actually reject. They say, no, we will spend the night in the square. But he urged them strongly, so they turned his way and entered his house. So he prevails. He prevails upon them to come into his house. He prepares it's funny because the English translation says a feast for them. Right here, it says he prepares a feast. He prepared a feast for them, although in the Hebrew it's mishteh, which is actually more of a drinking event. So he made for them this drinking event and bake unleavened bread, and they ate. So they drank and they ate. So that's some good hospitality. Now, I think first of all, I think for anybody that's some high level hospitality. I think that even that might be considered, whether it's above and beyond or at least sort of a really good standard of hospitality. I think we can agree that Abraham definitely went above and beyond. He didn't mention anything about this calf. He only said, do you want some bread? And then prepared a calf. Here, I don't see this. I don't see this as an indictment of Lot's hospitality. I think really Lot's doing a good job. They drink, they eat. That's really great. So now going back to what we have here. So going back to what we have here. So I want to get into some rabbinic commentary around this, or some rabbinic insights and wisdom that they draw from the Abraham and Lot's hospitality to these visitors. So here's one text. It's from this text known as Avot de Rabbi Natan. Let your house be open. Let the poor be members of your household. Let a person's house be open to the north and to the south and to the east and to the west, even as Abraham's house was. For Abraham made 4 doors to his house, that the poor might not be troubled to go around the house, but that each would find they faced a door as they approached. Now, Abraham, I think, is being widely read not only in what we saw in Genesis 18, but here in this rabbinic text as being not just the paradigm, but the paragon, like this, someone that we should only hope to aspire to be as far as hospitality. This is, Abraham went super above and beyond, an incredible host, and not only let your house be open. What does this be open mean? Well, let the poor be open. Anybody, 4 doors, anybody can just come in, poor, etc. Now this is, I think even the rabbis are trying to say this is amazing. If anybody could do this, I don't know that anybody does this. I don't even think the rabbis did this, but I think they understood this was certainly I think they understood that this was certainly a level to attain. This is the highest way to perform hospitality. I also think it's kind of extreme, and I think even they themselves understood this to be extreme. So moving on, we have, this is really fascinating. So the rabbis talk, this is from the Babylonian Talmud. It's from Shabbat 127a. And Rav Yehuda said, that Rav said, is greater is welcoming guests or hospitality towards guests than receiving the divine presence. And so this is a pretty bold, claim here that we have. Not only, this is a pretty bold claim that hospitality towards guests is greater than receiving the divine presence, but they get to prove this. They get to use a proof text from what we have here in this week's Torah portion, that from Abraham, he said, Lord, if I now have found favor in your sight, please pass not from your servant. So basically, while these 3 men visited him, while they were visiting, he says to God, hold up, God, I have to go receive these divine visitors, these visitors. I don't know who these people are. They're strangers. I've never met them before in my life. And here I am. Here I am, we are talking, and yet I need to depart from your presence. God, you need to go on hold. I have visitors I need to provide hospitality to. And then we also have here that Rav Yehuda Bar Shila said that Rabbi Asi said that Rabbi Yochanan said, it's a big chain here, that there are 6 matters a person enjoys the profits of in this world, and nevertheless, the principle exists for him in the world to come. And here these 6 are. 1 is hospitality towards guests. 2 is visiting the sick. Consideration during prayer. Rising early to the study hall. 1 who raises one's sons in Torah study. And 1 who judges another favorably, giving the benefit of the doubt. Now, these 6 things are all good. Basically, this worldly thing, they are really interpersonal matters. They are interpersonal. You could say they're not all exactly mitzvot. They're not all exactly commandments. They are performance of good deeds in this world. So, for instance, 1 who raises one's sons to Torah study is definitely meritorious. It's definitely very good. Torah study is great. Not everybody can do it. So that's a good thing, even though Torah study itself is a mitzvah. It's widely regarded by the rabbis as a mitzvah, as the performance of a commandment. We also have 1 who judges another favorably. So this is totally not a commandment at all. It is not a mitzvah, and yet it is a really important rabbinic idea. It's a really important rabbinic value, especially since it's not the easiest to do. If you have someone doing something, you can easily view them as doing for not good purposes. So maybe give them the benefit of the doubt, because we don't know everything going on. There's also, we have 2 other things here: consideration during prayer, rising early to the study hall. These are also good things to be doing. Now we get to they are the first two, but I'm making them my final two, which are visiting the sick and hospitality towards guests. And visiting the sick is definitely a really good, and it's a great Jewish value of visiting the sick. It's a good practice. And but finally is it's in Hebrew. It's called hachnasas orchin. It's made up of two words. Orchin are guests, and hachnasat is bringing them in. Now that's actually really what we see Lot does in chapter 19 here, is he brings them into his house, just as Abraham brought those visitors into his tent. So bringing someone in, and whether that's providing them a place to sleep, providing them food, providing them drink, and these are key aspects here. These are good Jewish values of things to do here. We have, I want to include this. Here we have Maimonides. We have Rambam, who says, the reward for escorting guests is greater than any other. It is a practice introduced by our father Abraham, a way of kindness which was habitual with him. He served food and drink to wayfarers and escorted them. Hospitality to wayfarers is greater than welcoming the divine presence. So this is exactly what we saw. Who said it? Rav Yehuda, who quoted Rav, that hospitality to wayfarers is greater than welcoming the divine presence. As it is written, he saw three men and ran to meet them. Escorting them is even greater than receiving them, which is really fascinating. So receiving them, what Rambam here, Maimonides, means with escorting them, I believe, is on the way out. So not just receiving them, hey, come on in, but hanging out with them and then even escorting them along their way. And then the sages have declared anyone who does not escort his guests, it is as if he sheds blood, which is a really sharp and strong comment to make, as far as it's definitely a very escalated rhetoric. What does this mean? As if you shed blood. I mean, shedding blood is a high, deeply concerning language, but I think this ratcheting up of the rhetoric really points to how highly regarded here is escorting guests. So not just welcoming people in, although that's important, but also hanging out with them, making them feel comfortable, and then also helping them along their way. Now, interestingly, this sheet that I've found also sort of uses those values from Genesis 18 and, for that matter, 19, even with Lot, is this Leviticus 19. Now, Leviticus 19 is one of the, I consider Leviticus 19 as the absolute most central chapter in the entire Torah. It is, first of all, the centralmost chapter in the entirety of the book of Leviticus. And the book of Leviticus is the centralmost chapter in, centralmost book in the 5 books of Moses, the Torah. And for broader context, Leviticus 19 has lots of things in it. It has Shabbat. It has leaving the corners of your field for the poor. It has honoring elders in it. It has so much good stuff. So I'm just going to mention these two verses here, verses 33 and 34. When a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall not wrong him. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I, the Lord, am your God. This is, there's something to be said for providing hospitality to people. And it's not the easiest thing. I think we can all agree. It's not the easiest thing to just say, hey, people I don't know, people I've never met, come on in, let's have a drink, have bread, stay the night. It's definitely a vulnerability. And I think that's one of the, like I mentioned earlier, I'm not even sure with this Avot Rabbi Natan piece that this is even an expectation of anybody, because it creates such a vulnerability of allowing just anybody in, because who knows what they could do to your physical person, to your property, to those you love. So it's not the easiest thing for anybody to just allow. I think that's the hardest for us to really consider as a reality. But certainly I definitely think it's a lovely aspiration. But nevertheless, I do want to go back. I really find that this is a really fascinating assertion from Rav Yehuda, who quotes Rav here, that hospitality towards guests is greater than receiving the divine presence. It's really, I mean, there's a funny little sense of chutzpah here involved with saying, hey, God is great, but it's really important to welcome guests. This hospitality thing is really important. Now, of course, how many of us actually have access or have experience with receiving the divine presence? In the Hebrew, it's called the Shekhinah, the divine presence. So how many of us actually have that opportunity ever? It's not reality for, I think, any of us. Even though although Abraham here, he does have this juxtaposition between receiving the divine presence and also these guests and inviting them in. So I thought that's, it's kind of chutzpahdik, and yet at the same time, it's certainly the rabbis asserting a very special value of, you know what, people are important too. God may be in front of you, but you still need to, it's still highly important to welcome guests, to provide them food, shelter, and drink. So I hope that was, yeah. So hospitality is important in Jewish thought. Thoughts, questions, Devin? Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. This was great. I hope that was helpful in showcasing what we get out of hospitality in this week's Torah portion, and not just from Abraham kicking off the portion, but even from his nephew Lot, who we later see in chapter 19 in his hospitality, even in Sodom, which we later on see that Sodom is a very inhospitable place. And nevertheless, he is quite hospitable himself. So both Abraham and Lot are quite hospitable to their guests. And it's certainly a key Jewish value that the rabbis espouse, and something that we all should aspire to. It's easier to say than to do. And yet it's still a great thing. So thank you so much for watching, everybody, and Shabbat Shalom.